I forced my fiancé into cutting off his late wife's family. I-25 FAM getting married to my fiancé, 29M, in May. When we first got together, he told me that he was married from 22 to his high school sweetheart. We met when he was 25, but she had already passed. He didn't cope well and stayed in contact with her family, namely father and two sisters, 19 and 24. It was a soft spot for me for a while at the beginning because there was so much history they had that we would not have, and it was tough knowing that she was all around him. I never told him and decided to work through it on my own, especially with the fact that he would often spend time with her family during our relationship. Her birthday, their anniversary, and anniversary of her passing, he'd spend the day with her family. It was uncomfortable at first knowing the man I loved was reminiscing about love he had with someone else, but I kept trying to see it from his perspective, and the last couple years I am completely secure in our relationship, and it doesn't bother me much anymore. Well, he proposed this time last year, and I was over the moon. I love this man with all my heart, but I recently learned that he never told them that we got engaged. I've been trying local coffee shops the past few months, rather than my usual run, and tried a new one. His late wife's sister worked there, and other than being awkward, she did a double take of my engagement ring and looked really unhappy. I didn't mention it, and left. My fiancé told me that she kept messaging him on social media about it, and I wasn't happy that he kept it a secret. He apologized and was very depleted by it all. He said that he didn't want to hide me, but he didn't want to hurt them either, and that both of us were a huge part of his life. I understand that and let him off the hook slightly, just told him to be upfront with them from now on. That was that. At least I thought so. A week ago on Sunday, I got a message from the 24-year-old asking if I was happy with myself, that I would never replace his late wife, and that if she was still alive, he'd chose her over me every time. She even said that he only kept me around for me money and something to stick his sausage in. I ignored it, but I can't say that it didn't affect me. When you're in my position, all these points are ones you have to work through, and it's not easy to get over those insecurities. It feels like a knock in the teeth when they're used against you. I mentioned it to him, and he comforted me and reassured me. He said he'd set boundaries with her, and I'd never have to hear from her again. Fine by me. That was until I found my car with grave robber smeared in red paint. I had saved for this car for a year, and it was expensive, very expensive. The tires were slashed and the windows cracked. I asked the store a few doors down for their CCTV camera footage of that night, but it was blurry and didn't catch much. It did manage to catch half a license plate, though, and the color and make of a car. It was his late wife's youngest sister's car. I told him I was filing a police report, and he asked me to hold off until he talked to them first. I told him no, but I would if they paid for the damages and apologized to my face. He set up the meeting for last night, and it didn't go well, to say the least. Everyone was shouting. The sisters told me yes, both of them had nothing to be sorry for, and that I should leave their family alone, including my fiancé and their family. He told them that it wasn't fair to him to be lonely forever, and that he'd hoped they'd be supportive of him finding love again. They told him he was betraying his late wife and that he never loved her if he'd marry someone else. They didn't have a problem with him having a new GF because he'd realize she was the only one for him and get tired of me. Now that hadn't happened. They were putting their foot down. The youngest told him to tell me that they were right and that he'd never love anyone like late wife. My fiancé broke down at the table. I picked him up and made us leave. I told them I'd be filing a report and suing for damages, and the next time they saw us would be in court. When we got back and calmed down, I gave him an ultimatum. Either he cuts contact or we call of the wedding and go out separate ways. I wasn't going to live my life with this harassment and someday subject my children to their bullying. He said they would never hurt a child, but I shot him down and said he didn't expect any of this either. He called their father, who was fairly chill about it all but still defending his daughters. They say I shouldn't control him and that I'm horrible for cutting them off. I don't know what to do. I can't live like this, and I don't think I should have to just because we're getting married. I forced my fiancé into cutting off his late wife's family. Update. I haven't spoken to my fiancé since the argument at the table, other than to tell him they go or I do. I texted him saying I thought it was time to discuss this, and he was back at home not a half hour later. He'd been staying with a friend the couple nights we had no contact. We sat on our bed to talk because my back is sore from all the packing, and I wasn't going to force myself to sit at the table. Before we even got to talking, he asked if we could cuddle for a minute. It definitely took some of the weight off, and we were able to talk like a couple and not awkward strangers, because, regardless of some people's beliefs, we do love each other, and it took me a very long time to feel confident in that fact. Before anyone calls me a doormat again, no, I was still sure I would stick to my ultimatum. The first thing I asked was if he felt he had enough time to make his decision, and he said he didn't need time. He was very shocked and bewildered at how so much could change in just a week, and how everything he knew was shook up that he couldn't think and went numb. He did apologize that he didn't take a more defensive stance at the cafe, and he doesn't want to make excuses for it. An explanation was that he genuinely didn't expect such a vitriolic response. He hid the engagement because he knew they weren't over late wife's passing and would be upset at the news. It wasn't like I would feel upset by them not knowing, which I wasn't really. He's known these girls since before they were in double digits, and he would never have thought them capable of it. It came so far out of left field that he froze. I asked him if there was any possibility that either of them had a thing for him, and he looked very confused and disturbed. I said how I've had people tell me it's not uncommon for siblings to do this after loss, and he thought on it. Turns out you were right. He said the 24 about 8 months after late wife's passing made a move and tried to kiss him. He immediately left and told her mother about it. Mother and father are divorced now, but weren't then. She was a minor at the time and messaged him saying she would be 18 soon, so it wasn't a big deal. Her mother made her see the school counselor and didn't allow her to be alone with him for a while. It was years ago, so he'd forgotten it even happened. He said he was sure that wasn't the case now because it had been so long, but I'm not so convinced. Not that it matters anymore. He opened up his Facebook and gave it to me to read. 24-year-old had been messaging him, which he ignored. She ranged from telling him off to crying and saying how betrayed the family was to trying to manipulate him against me. He said he was sure that he needed to put them behind him and had been thinking it on and off since he proposed, but couldn't bring himself to do it. After this week, the fire was lit and he knew what he had to do. It was all just abstract until suddenly it was very real. He asked me how I've been coping, and I told him. I felt like I'd done everything right, but somehow things turned out worse than if I'd been the jealous type and stopped their contact at the beginning. I tried to be understanding and put in so much effort to be secure in myself and our relationship, only for everything I worked on to be thrown in my face like I was a mistress that was cheating with him. He didn't blink the entire time and just listened. He said he should have been more observant and realized I was struggling with this so that he could help me, but I've always been the strong one, so he neglected to, and he'll do better. As I've said in a few comments now, his parents had him in their late 40s and are retired. He hates to involve them in negativity, but I was stunned when he said he's been talking to them about this since the first Facebook message. They were very understanding, but his father took a tough love approach. He said the best quote I think I've ever heard. "Get your act together before the jig is up." They offered to come stay for a while and help us move. I don't think that's necessary, but I really appreciated the thought. On the subject of moving, I made it clear that I would not be living in this house any longer than I had to, and he completely agreed. His parents offered to find us a place in their state if we wanted to have more of a support network, and I'm honestly considering it after all this. They're only a state away from my own family, so we'd be a lot better off. His job is remote, and I should be able to find work there easily enough. I've been in contact with a friend who's a mechanic, and they've quoted me between $1–2K for the damages, but that's an at-cost estimate as a discount. A few people have said to get a real statement and to shop around. The real cost is between $4–5K, and that's just for the noticeable damage.